it was either late last week or over the weekend that Topps announced their, in my opinion, new big star that they're signing to an exclusive autograph contract, and that is going to be Juju Watkins from the USC women's basketball team. And this, I mean, it makes sense. I'm wondering if I don't know. Like I said, I've never really liked the exclusive autograph contracts. It almost feels like maybe the exclusive contract should just be like within the CBA or within the contract that Topps has with the Players Association. Like because there would already hypothetically be, if she had not signed any type of exclusive, there would probably be Panini and Topps autographs for her. And I'm guessing they're signing her now so that way, you know, they she doesn't sign any autographs with Panini up until she gets drafted potentially. That's probably the reason. I'm also not 100% sure whether the WNBA exclusive is also part of the NBA exclusive contract that Topps is going to be taking over. If it is, I think that'll be cool. I think she'll probably end up being the first I think she'll end up probably being the first big women's athlete to have like a Topps WNBA product if the WNBA license is coming over with the NBA license. And the the story, I mean, obviously it's great, it's great to see more representation into women's sports because I think women's sports has become a lot more popular, sports that are maybe people watch secondarily. Obviously Caitlin Clark made such huge waves last year and the year before in college. Or no, sorry, 2 years ago, not last year because she was in the pros last year. But then you got Paige Beckers this year. I mean, there are phenomenal athletes, and I think that I don't want to say that like women's basketball got like blessed with like multiple athletes in a generation that are like spread out enough that we'll all see them playing in college for a couple of years and then going to the pros. They're not all rookies at the same time. Obviously, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese being rookies last year. Sabrina Ionescu being a rookie, which is crazy to think that she was a rookie back in 2020. And then Paige Beckers, like I've talked about Paige Beckers at length on here, and she and Caitlin Clark, I believe, have signed exclusives with Panini. So that means that you're probably not going to get any more Bowman autographs for those athletes. And I mean, the exclusive for Paige Beckers is she's going to be massive for next year's Prism because she's going to be probably the number one pick going to, I believe Dallas owns the number one pick, the Dallas Wings in the WNBA. And then Juju Watkins, which I think it's not this upcoming draft. It might be the next draft where she's eligible. Because I think in the WNBA, you have to be 21 to get drafted. You have to be 21 the year of the draft. And I know that she was a freshman last year. So it's probably going to be after next season is when she is eligible to be drafted. At least I hope so. I mean, that would be really cool if we have like 3 consecutive years of like really solid kind of game-changing number one picks in the WNBA. And so, yeah, that was big news. And the other interesting part about that was that there was somebody that tweeted that this was going to be bad for women's basketball cards because Panini had the license, which and then someone corrected that person, but it's just corrected that person by saying, "Oh, Topps is going to be taking over." Presumably, Topps is going to be taking over the license for the WNBA along with the NBA. But this person, and not even really necessarily to call out this person, but they didn't know that Topps was taking over the NBA license, and it really kind of put some stuff into perspective for me because in my head, I think everybody is as online as I am. I just think being online and I don't know exactly what that could be or where that comes from, but like in my head, I'm like, oh, everyone follows sports card news as much as I do. Now, granted, I don't know, that is a big piece of news that I feel like would be pretty known if you're on social media and you're into sports cards. But at the same time, the news moves so quickly and it's the cycle of news moves much quicker than it ever used to, especially with social media, that it's just, put into perspective that some people just don't really follow the news as closely as I do, or as closely as people on social media do. And it is a decent example. I mean, I don't know if I don't think it was a contentious um, interaction online, really. It was just the person was like, hey, they have Tops is getting the license. So Juju Watkins will probably have a Tops card, and that will be big for her. I mean, sure, she probably would have some college Panini cards, but also I think it was this year or last year with her uh first Bowman. So again, we're not in a place where first Bowman can be considered a card that you would want to be purchasing if you're looking to prospect any players like that in college. I think it will be in the future, because on one hand, I think it will be. On the other hand, I'm wondering if if Topps has to market this differently, or if the market itself is going to determine that this is the card that you want to buy. Because here's the thing, sort of, the market doesn't want to be told what to do, if that makes sense. I think the sports card market is very prone to they're very prone to wanting to do the opposite of what marketing and what people like the sports card companies are telling them to do. So, and again, I just don't know if Top starts to market this card as like the rookie card that you want to be buying, does the market reject that concept, or do they start accepting the concept more? I don't really, I guess I don't know one way or the other, because we're still so, new into this new era of rookie cards. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Tops and their Bowman college products, because again, Bowman baseball, they're at least in their pro uniforms, so they're on a team that they could potentially play in the majors in. Where the college card, yes, it's licensed, and they have, like, Cooper Flag has his Duke logo, and Juju Watkins has the USC logo, but they also are going to be playing once they get to the pros. They're going to be playing for a different team, and I don't know. Maybe that's where the disconnect happens between why college cards don't end up becoming as large as maybe they should. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I think that interaction that I saw really was a little bit eye opening. I mean, I create content online to help people learn about stuff, but at the same time, I am following the news like very closely every single day. So it's like knowing what's the hot trending topic in the sports card industry is sort of the point of doing the content. But although there's people online that maybe follow the content, maybe they're not following every single piece of sports card news. And if you are, and I think the whole point of this is if you are interacting with somebody and they genuinely don't seem to know, because I do think that there are trolls who pretend to not know, like, realistically. But I think if you're genuinely interacting with somebody who doesn't know the information, in my opinion, I think it's good to, like, I think it's good karma to help somebody who doesn't know the information, rather than just moving on or to talking down to that person. Because overall, there are still new people that are coming into sports cards, and whether we've seen the highest percentage of influx of new people, or if maybe we potentially haven't. I think we probably have seen the highest percentage of people that are going to come into the industry. But whether that number decreases, or whether the number of people coming versus going decreases, there's still going to be new people who are getting into this hobby and getting into the industry. And, they deserve all the respect the same way that anybody else that's knows all the information does. And that's sort of my viewpoint on kind of the topic, or the concept of new people coming into sports cards. It's also an opportunity to create, an extra level of, like, um what's the word I'm looking for, an extra level of, like, helping somebody. That's not the word I'm looking for. And credibility, maybe. If you can help somebody that doesn't know, they're going to probably recognize that person that helped them as, like, they helped them. So, that's my suggestion, is if you see somebody that needs help or has questions, just help them, because it's gonna ultimately, at the end of the day, it's good karma to help people. And it's also, I think, good maybe potentially for your business if you are the one that could help somebody who doesn't know the answer to a question or doesn't know the news that came out that day. This is one of probably my favorite weeks of the year. March Madness, I think, is probably the obvious one, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit. And also, baseball is back. So there is a series happening over in Tokyo between the Dodgers and Cubs. And it's like the start of the season, which opening day for the regular season for the MLB is going to be, let's just look this up really quick. Opening day, sorry, just 1 second. I'm got it up here. So it's basic. I mean, but it is basically opening day. Okay, so it's like still spring training through the 20th. So opening day is probably next week at some point. Um, for all the rest of the teams, because I believe that these games in Tokyo count towards the regular record for both of these teams. Um, and that means we're going to get a new batch of the debut patches, and I do wonder, like in a game like this, if they're going to add something to the Cubs or the Dodgers players, like whenever they're that pitcher that they sign, whenever he gets his debut patch, like that means he's probably going to, well, he will be getting his debut patch card obviously this year. But does it, I think it was Sue's, she put out a good tweet. It was like, does it make a difference? Like that the patches were worn in the Tokyo series. I don't know. I mean, if they put something on the card, that would be cool. Or if they figure out a way to incorporate a different, I don't think they should change the design of the card. I think somewhere on the back, or even I think if they were to put a like stamp on the front that says Tokyo series or something, I think that would be very cool. But this is also, we're going to be getting close to some of the announcements of opening day rosters. And it appears, unfortunately, that Jack Corgleone, he is going to be starting in the minors. That was one of the big players I was kind of looking forward to seeing. He's starting in Double A, so that means he probably is going to get called up fairly soon. Like I would imagine he probably ends up being one of those early season call ups in May or late April or something. So he's going to be a very exciting player to watch this year. I hope that he ends up getting a rookie card this year. I think he's ready to play in the majors. So I'm hoping he would get a card this year. But either way, we're going to see him in the minors to start the season. We're going to be getting a new batch of rookies getting their debut patches probably on opening day for some players. Pitchers, I think it's probably once they get their first start. I'm not sure about relief pitchers, I guess. I think maybe they just have the patch until they play the game. I don't know how they would choose relief pitchers. Maybe if they have like a game plan or something, because usually managers would maybe they would tell or maybe they wouldn't. I don't know exactly how they would do that. But either way, that's going to be that. And the other big sports news this week is going to be March Madness. And one thing that Topps announced is that they have partnered with the NCAA. They put out a tweet. Let's see when that was. That was probably earlier today or at some point recently. So they put out essentially that they're going to be partnering with the men's and women's tournaments. For the first time, they'll be creating on-demand cards of the biggest moments in real time. Now, this is something that I think needs to be executed quickly, I think, is unfortunately like maybe the way I would put it. I hope that they are able to get cards into people's hands by the start of the next week, depending on when the card comes out. Like if they have some sort of upset card, I don't like, if they upset again, I would hope that the people would be able to get those cards before the start of the Sweet 16. If the upset happens in the first round and they lose in the second round, then there's nothing you can really do about that. But I'll be interested to see how they roll this program out. If it's going to be like they said in real time is what it says. So that does that mean they're going to be doing cards every single day of certain players, or is it the next day, or is it like how like I'm just interested to know how they're going to do this because I think on one hand, the print on demand type of product is very useful for tournaments and times of the year like this in sports. But I feel like it's a very, I don't know what the word is, maybe not thin line or dangerous line. It's a very like tight rope, maybe that's what I'm trying to say. It's a very tight rope that they have to kind of navigate across because hypothetically they come out with, whatever, let's just say McNeese State. I mean, that's a team that I think a lot of people are picking as an upset favorite. I think if they make that, they're one of I think people's favorite teams. I mean, there was like the video of them. The manager knew all the words to some rap song, which I saw that and I was like, this guy is gonna be a star. He's not a kid, but he's a guy. This guy's gonna be a star. Team manager knows all the words. They go on, they win their conference tournament. Now they're a 13 seed. I mean, 13 seeds are probably one of the lower-ish seeds that end up making upsets or doing upsets and going a little bit of a run. So it's like, if they have a McNeese State card, are they going to be able to, like, if McNeese State, let's just say they make it past the second round and they make it to the Sweet 16, I hope that they're able to get the cards into people's hands by the start of the next week of games because I don't know. I don't think it's there. There must be something where there are no returns whatsoever on these cards because it's the type of thing where it's like I don't even think people are necessarily prospecting on the fact like it. I mean, but also people could prospect. Like hypothetically, say McNeese State makes it to, which I don't think they will. I think this tournament is very top heavy. I think if I'm going to be honest, so I don't know if there's going to be. There might be some upsets in the first round, but I think by the time we get to like the Final Four and the championship, it's going to be two of the top teams. Like, I don't think it's going to be like a surprise 8 seed that is going to really make it. But like, let's say McNeese State makes it to the Elite 8. Let's say they make it to the Sweet 16. Like, does that mean that people could potentially buy the round of 64 card and then because McNeese State makes it past another round, like, does that mean that people would want to buy more of that specific card? I don't know. I think potentially, depending on how the tournament goes, and I think if Topps does it right, it could be a very cool concept. But at the same time, that's going to require Topps to, and I don't know. I mean, do it right. I'm using air quotations here as how I would view it as correct or how I would do it myself. I don't know necessarily if Topps obviously has a plan and they are a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So like they're doing it right is more or less probably just going to be like making money on the product itself. So we'll see how that works and what they're actually going to do. Like, is it going to be, because I've talked about this on the podcast. I think this is probably like the third year that I've done the podcast during March Madness. I always thought that they should do print on demand sets for each team at the beginning of the tournament. I think once you get to, and I mean, I would even go round of 68 because I know it's 64 teams. I would even go the 4 extra play-in teams. They also get a set. I think that would be cool. And it, like, worst case scenario is they don't sell many of the certain teams, but like, I don't know. I just think that a full set of every single team in the tournament would make a lot of sense. I don't know if and I think doing it before the tournament probably makes the most amount of sense. And that would obviously be kind of tough. I mean, the team sets, the turnaround's probably pretty quick, but at the same time, I just see like, you kind of know they're like, I don't know, 50 of the teams, you probably know who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. So it's like you can do a lot of prep work for the NCAA tournament potentially to put these sets out there. But then again, I don't know. Maybe it's more prep work. Maybe the prep work is not worth the money reward on what they could sell for the products. I don't really know. So I guess we'll see. We only really have had the announcement that they're going to be partnering with the tournaments and that there's going to be more on-demand cards coming out. We don't know exactly what the plan or the strategy is, but I think it is big that they're making some sort of announcement. They're not just rolling something out without any type of announcement. They are rolling out what could potentially be a pretty popular program, or product, they're rolling it out with at least a little bit of an announcement. Now that we are about a week away from opening day, obviously there's the Tokyo game, which I talked about a little bit on yesterday's podcast, but we have some data on the top 20 most collected MLB players during the offseason, or PSA's most graded. I think that's what I meant to say there. And it feels like it shouldn't really be that big of a surprise. I mean, it's littered with rookies from last year, which makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I feel like number one, you can probably guess number one. It's gonna be Otani at 87,000, Paul Skeens at 50,000, Ellie De La Cruz at 30,000, Aaron Judge at 20, Jackson Holiday at 20, also um, Jackson Morrell, Jackson Churio. I'm just gonna go down the list here. Bobby Witt at 15. Yamamoto at 12,000, Jason Dominguez, which I can't believe that Jason Dominguez is still on this list. I mean, he's been pretty good, but like for him to kind of be on this list still is kind of surprising. I mean, it might just be that based on how many cards he has realistically. Then Wyatt Langford, Juan Soto, Gunnar Henderson, Junior Camingro. I don't know that, definitely didn't pronounce that last name right. Mike Trout, Freddie Freeman, Ronald Acuna, Bryce Harper, Julio Rodriguez, and then Amaga, Shota, which I think that must be the rookie that plays for the Cubs. I'm pretty sure. I'm not the best at pronouncing names, but that list I think it's littered with rookies from last year, but it also has a lot of veterans. And I think the thing that I'm most surprised about is that there's still that many cards. Like this is, I think, just to put into perspective, anybody, like a player like Ronald Acuna or a player like Juan Soto, I mean, anybody that is in Shohei Otani's rookie year, I think the thing when I look at those lists, it just puts into perspective for me is like, there are that many cards for everybody else, like everybody else on that list, and probably even more if you're looking at like a Jason Dominguez, well, actually, maybe not Jason Dominguez, but like anybody from like the 2018. So maybe Julio Rodriguez would be an example. But anybody from like 2018 to now, there are just as many baseball cards for those rookies as there are, even though Otani is not double, but he's like 30,000 more than Skeens. And Skeens was even, I mean, Skeens at 50. So like that's, again, these are just numbers that I'm putting into perspective here. So like in his first off season, essentially in his first year, I think this probably is from like, if I had to guess, it's probably from like October until now, realistically. So that doesn't include all the cards that were also graded during last season. Ellie De La Cruz, I mean, another phenomenal example of players, rookies from last year. I mean, Cruz too, we know was a rookie in Series 1. He was the top rookie in Series 1. And Skeens didn't have his first rookie until Topps update. I think he had a short print in Series 2. But I think just putting these players' numbers into perspective, I think it's impressive that a player like Skeens could be at that 50K range. I mean, he was probably, with a lot of the news that went around about his debut patch, which I believe is depending on when you're listening to this, it's around $850,000 right now. Also the Jackson Holiday patch is also up. That's in that same auction. So we got like two pretty big auctions all within the same one. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but like I like I said when I was talking about the card, I feel like my gauge was a little bit off on how popular this card was. And like immediately within like the first couple days of the card going up, there was like 50 bids already put in for the card. So all in all, I think that this is probably going to end up being $1 million card. I mean, there's still a good amount of time left on the auction. I believe it's right before the start of opening day is when this auction ends. So there's still some time there. But I think, like I said, the thing when I look at these lists that I put into perspective is just how many cards there are of each of these players. And although a decent amount of cards have already been graded for a player like Yotani, there's still over 100,000 cards that, or almost over 100,000 cards that can be graded in a very short span. And I don't think that's only a very small percentage of the cards that Otani is going to end up having over the course of his career. I mean, he's in every insert set, he's on every base checklist, he's on everything. So it's like, which granted, I maybe the inserts and maybe the cards on the base checklist don't exactly affect the pricing of his cards overall. But I do think that cards that are more rare and some of his autographs throughout the course of his career are going to end up watering down a little bit of his market. And that's my opinion based on, I think, supply and demand realistically. But like, I sometimes don't understand the supply and demand within sports cards, as sometimes the supply and demand aspect of the market doesn't exactly line up with where it should, I think, because like there's also a first buyer's premium on a lot of cards. So that is where I sort of look at it. I say, I don't understand why people are still buying. And again, it could even just be that, like, there's the thing I talked about the other day with somebody not knowing that Topps is taking over the license. Like, maybe there's some people that just, they just don't like, that's the bit, Topps taking over the NBA license is one of the biggest news stories within sports cards over the past 10 years, other than Fanatics buying Topps, I think. Uh, so the thought that someone might not recognize that, like, hypothetically, the first card of a certain player sells for a certain amount. If it's just the player that they like, they might just think, oh, well, I'll just buy this card because I don't really know. So maybe it is just people don't know. So that's sometimes where I feel like my gauge on the market and supply and demand aspect of things doesn't exactly line up as well as maybe as I think it should. Um, so that's where maybe I'm like, oh, maybe the fact that Otani is in all of these sets actually is better for his market. Maybe it gets more. Maybe the fact that there are more cards available for Otani means that his market is going to be wider, which means there's going to be more people who own his cards that want his cards. I mean, other than the fact that he's like the face of baseball right now, that would be another reason why a ton of people would probably want his cards. But then you look at a player like a Paul Skeens or Ellie De La Cruz, and I think maybe that's what it is for baseball. And I think also I do get nervous with Paul Skeens because I look at a player like Steven Strasburg, who had very similar buzz from what I've heard from listening to people talk about sports cards back in 2011. Um, sorry, Strasburg had a very similar like vibe and aura to him of like he's a pitcher who is going to completely revolutionize the game for a team, and that's what might happen for Paul Skeens in Pittsburgh. But obviously with pitching, you're only playing every 5 days. It's not uncommon for many pitchers to be out for a whole entire season because of Tommy John. Feels like it's less common for position players to be out. So Strasburg also was very injury prone throughout his career. I don't know if that's. I mean, I hope that that doesn't happen to Paul Skeens. But like another pitcher taking sort of the hobby by storm is not something we have seen in quite some time. So I'll be interested to see how these numbers change and develop. Like if he has a good season, or if he has like a bad season, do these numbers just fall off a cliff? Or if he has a good season, do we start to see Paul Skeens cards, the number of grade and the number of them and the prices start to look a little bit more like Shohei Ohtani's? It has been a bit of a slow week in the sports card news cycle. And on today's episode, kind of two topics. We're gonna see how it goes and see if we how we much we can expand upon these topics. The first one is that Will Klein, a pitcher for Kansas City, actually purchased his one of one debut patch card. And I I think players buying their own cards is very cool. I think we've seen some players like I believe like there was it might have been another Royals prospect who actually I remember interviewing like way back in the day. Like this was probably like 20, this might have been like during COVID, or it might have been like 2021, like very early on in my kind of content journey for sports cards. He had bought his Superfractor Bowman and then the one of one paper Bowman. And yeah, I mean, it was cool to hear his experience kind of talking about his sports card experience, I guess, and talking about remembering seeing the cards, like remembering when he signed some of the cards and like now getting the opportunity to buy the cards is very cool. I would imagine this is definitely a piece of history that a lot of players are probably going to want to buy. And it almost makes me wonder if that is going to potentially drive up the price of some of these cards because it is like a patch from their debut. It's really like I don't know what they end up doing with the jerseys themselves. I think they probably are able to keep them, but there could be something in the Players Association where they may even have to wear them again. So it's like this patch was literally only worn in one of their games, where their rookie jersey potentially they could have worn it in multiple games, or they may not even own it anymore because it could be something where the team gets the jersey. I mean, technically I suppose it would be owned by the team, the jersey itself. So they're the ones that end up getting the jersey. So like this patch or any of the commemorative patches that go onto these cards, they are the only time that those pieces of memorabilia were ever worn in the one game in their rookie debut. So I thought that was pretty cool. Which actually, if you're a pitcher, if you're a relief pitcher, maybe you might have worn the patch in multiple games, but only the one game where you played is where that patch ends up going in the cards. So, Will Klein, he put out on social media that he was looking to buy it, and the purchase apparently has gone through, which I think is very cool. The next piece of info, kind of a news story, pretty big news story, is that Topps is expanding their buyback program to WWE. Um, that's not really the surprising part. The surprising part to me is that I don't know. I suppose that the maybe the wrestlers, maybe I'm not underestimating, maybe I'm under appreciating the wrestlers that are in the buyback program. Because it's Charlotte Flair and Tiffany Stratton, and then Jay Uso and Gunther, who I believe they're in two title matches in WrestleMania. So that's what it's going to be. It's the winners of the following WrestleMania matches will be eligible for the Topps Championship buyback. So I think maybe it's that they're both in the world title for the men's and women's, and um that's why they chose those four and then the two, depending on who wins them. Uh because also, there could have been Cody. You could have done Cody Rhodes and John Cena, and it's maybe, but also Jey Uso and Gunther. I think are they're two rising stars. I just think the storyline doesn't feel like for them to use the buyback program. It feels like they should have just gone with Cody Rhodes and John Cena. Now maybe there is some sort of other piece that they're missing here with them. Like maybe they're not exactly, maybe they're going to have their own buyback program, or maybe they're going to have their own thing potentially, because that would make more sense to me in the concept of because the MVP buyback program, that's what it was for the MLB. It was for the MVP of the league. So I don't know. Maybe potentially these two matches could be better than any of the other matches on the card. And maybe that even could be why, I don't know how closely Topps is working with WWE to get any type of inside info. But, maybe potentially there's something there where Topps was given that the info that these two matches are going to be, some of the more anticipated on the card. I don't, again, maybe that could be potentially a little bit of a stretch. But still, I think, and maybe that is the reason why they're doing it. And the last piece of news that I saw come across my timeline as I was looking for topics is that we have some confirmation that Prism Basketball is getting another Monopoly release for last season. So this is going to be the third release of this one, which I guess this makes sense because there was a or sorry, not WWE, a WNBA release from last year's product. So it does make sense that there would be a men's release here. Um, I don't know. I think I I always thought the expansion of the brands was a good decision. I am going to be totally honest. I was not a huge fan of the execution of what they did with Prism Monopoly. I think it's probably going to be one of those products that is like looked back upon and is like, what were we even doing during this era? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's probably products during the what's it called during like the junk wax era that people look back and they go maybe that was like when the era jumped the shark. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we look back at this era of sports cards and if we see a significant downturn from 2 or 3 years ago, if that is like a peak moment, like I wouldn't be surprised if we see sports cards in this era have jumped the shark metaphorically because of Prism Monopoly, if I'm going to be completely honest. Like it really was just the epitome of like we're trying to make money, here's what we're going to do to make the money. Like we're just going to try and suck as much money out of our collectors and out of people who like cards as possible. But I don't know. I mean, that's just how I view it. That's how I see it. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that I don't know. I think it's I like the expansion of the Prism branding. I just don't like the Prism branding, the Prism Monopoly branding that they decided to go with here versus like if they had done something like I've always suggested is doing a paper Prism product. And maybe that is sort of again is shifting away from the point of Prism. Maybe it's supposed to be a shiny set, but at the same time I just feel like it feels like that would have been a better idea than I don't know, like making a Prism Monopoly cards because I just think that there's an expansion of a brand they could have done. And, for me, unfortunately, the expansion of the brand was not in the way that I really wanted them to do it. When I was talking about the Paul Skeens one of one patch card, I thought there was still like a week or two on the auction. Apparently, this ended like in the last day or so. And so the final sale of this card was $1.1 million, and it says with buyer premium. So the bid was probably like 800 or 900,000, and then the 1.1 adds the extra 100,000 maybe. Actually, that's something I just made up off the top of my head. I don't know if that's actually correct, but whatever. 1.1. That's the sale of Paul Skeens one of one. So yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I felt like my the popularity gauge I talked about being thinking it was a little bit off. Thinking I wasn't 100% sure if the hype had died off on this card or if people, we had already moved on to the next year. So like were people going to be moved on to the next set of rookies? Like that's sort of something that I have seen just very often within the industry is that as soon as a new season starts, like the old season, like what was it, the meme from Toy Story or whatever where Andy drops the toy or something. It's just like whenever there's a new set of rookies, people just seem to like forget the old rookies. Like maybe but maybe Paul Skeens is the exception here. So I wasn't sure if the hype was going to die off. It clearly didn't. So $1.1 million. That's what the final sale of this card is for. I will be interested to know who if this buyer ends up coming out and saying that they bought the card. Also, this is a perfect example of like why you would sell the card and not like take the offer that the Pirates were giving you. Because yeah, sure, maybe in the long run, depending on the seats, maybe you end up with 2 or 3 million. But like the amount of extra work you'd have to do, which granted, that's sort of to say you'd get an extra million or two and not be willing to put in the work of selling the tickets. Maybe that is a little bit nearsighted. Maybe in retrospect, it's like, well, maybe you would want to do the work. But also, if the tickets are like not directly behind home plate, then you're looking at essentially the same pricing, like maybe a little bit cheaper if you were to sell all the tickets. So yeah, the people who were saying that they shouldn't, that they should still do the experience and not sell the card, it's like, come on, what are we talking about here? And again, the people who, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a big contingency of people, but there were some people online who were saying that this was a conspiracy, that like maybe the 11-year-old didn't really pull it. I think it is a little bit weird that the card is a tops card. It was pulled anonymously, and then it was also then sold on the platform of the company who made the card, which I understand Tops and Fanatics are kind of two different things. They're the same sort of business. So I don't know. I can see how people might think that's suspicious, but I think in this case, it seems like pretty right. It seems like nothing fishy really happened, I guess. I mean, again, people I think were quick to judge that, like, we see everybody else. We see everybody else who pulls these crazy cards, and then we don't see the card that is like the biggest card from 2024. I can see how people would be skeptical there, but also at the same time, this family just made $1 million on a card. Granted, they probably have to pay 30 or 40% in taxes, so they really made like 600,000 or 700,000. But I mean, that's life changing money. I mean, if you obviously if you have to make sure you're spending the money correctly, like you have to make sure you're putting it in, and I'm hoping that there's some sort of fund that the parents had set up, or that, like, I don't know, so the kid doesn't get left out to dry here, because the kid is the one who pulled it apparently. So there's that. Also, we have the which this set of auctions was actually like pretty wild. There was also the one of one National Treasures logo man, with Victor Wembanyama. That card also sold in this auction. That was a PSA 9, but because there's no autos, this is like the creme de la creme of his cards. Maybe potentially his best card, I would say, because he doesn't have any autos. If he had autos, it would be the one of one logo man autograph, obviously. But because he doesn't have any autos, this is like, I think, probably one of Wembanyama's best cards. Sells for 528,000. Also, the Jackson Holiday card sold for 198,000. That would not excuse me, not graded. We also had a red Bowman number to 5, of Juan Soto that sold, which this PSA 9, I guess, is the highest grade of the number to 5s. That one sold for 204,000. There was a PSA 10, it looks like, of the Magic Bird, the Topps 1980 rookie, that like triple card. There was a PSA 10 that sold for 432,000. There was also a Derek Jeter foil, SP 1993 SP foil, PSA 10 that sold for $324,000. So there were some really big auctions. There's also, let's see, a number 210 Luca, RPA that sold for 144,000. A Tiger Woods rookie auto from 2001 SP Authentic number to 100 that sold for 99,000. There was a PSA 10 Jordan Fleer that sold for 204,000. Kind of scrolling through here. Those are kind of the notable ones. I mean, there's a couple of Otanis that sold. Looks like there's a number to 10 Ovechkin, BGS 9.5 that sold for 72. There was a Tatum Gold BGS 9.5 that sold for 84. This was, I guess, the BGS 1 of 4 for that grade. None higher than a BGS 9.5. Sold for, like I said, $84,000. The big cards that I think are going to get a lot of publicity, which I'm actually a little bit surprised that Fanatics wouldn't wait to sell the Wembanyama, because, see, this is the thing that I kind of don't really know one way or the other. It's like, do people who are selling their cards want their cards sold when you have a Paul Skeens card like this in the rotation or in the set of cards, or do you want the card to be that card? Like, do you like this Wembenyama could have probably been like the premier card of any other auction, but because it's in this one, it's number two, and I don't think it's number three. I think it's definitely number two. The Jackson Holiday is definitely number three, but like we had basically last year's two rookies, their biggest cards sold in the same auction, which this doesn't happen that often. I feel like this is pretty rare that you see two big cards like this sell. And the one of one Wembenyama selling for 528,000. I don't know if that's necessarily a deal, but I know that like there was a one of one Prism that sold for a little bit higher than that. So like this card, I feel like maybe people don't realize that he doesn't have any autos and that's why it didn't sell for more, but it feels like this could have been probably another $1 million card if I'm going to be completely honest. So like that's the question I think I'll leave the podcast with is like, if you're a seller, do you want to have your card that is like, this one of one Victor Wembanyama? Do you want that to be the premier card in an auction? Or do you want it to be included in an auction where you have some crazy buzz and crazy excitement around a card like the Paul Skeens one?